I want to say thank you to Todd Forbes, District Manager, and his Lakeview staff for hosting this meeting. Excuse me, there he is right there, that's Todd Forbes. A quick round of introductions. We've got Quincy Barr. Well, first, I'm Todd Curtis. I'm Deputy State Director for Resources, Lands, and Minerals for Oregon, Washington, BLM. Real pleasure to be here. In addition to myself from the state office, we've got Kelly Barnes. We've got Kelly Barnes is our implementation coordinator for sage-grouse, our sage-grouse
Kelly
planner.
Van Norman.
Kelly Van Norman.
Kelly Barnes is an archaeologist.
She's an archaeologist. Angel Dawson is our lead planner for this effort for Oregon and Washington. And Rebecca Carter is our lead range specialist for Oregon and Washington and native to Lakeview. She works out of this office. Also, the main presenter of the evening and from headquarters is Quincy Barr, who is our national lead on this planning effort for the sage-grouse. And then we have in back Allie and Rachel, who are our contract representatives here to help us facilitate, take some of your comments. If you want to write comments down here, the intent of this meeting is not to collect comments, but to help inform you with any questions you have to help form your substantive comments that you, once you're done reviewing the draft and you want to put them in. So hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at it. We've got some good materials that we're going to give you a chance to browse, read. We've got some great references here that will compare the past two efforts to the current effort at the state level. Each state's listed there, and we're tabbed at Oregon, of course. And the reason we're here, as you know, a really quick history, 2010, the Fish and Wildlife Service was on a path to list the sage-grouse as endangered, and in order to not have that happen, we underwent an RMP, a planning effort to amend our RMPs across 77 different plans, 9 here in Oregon, and to accommodate habitat conservation for the sage-grouse. And we were successful in keeping the bird from being listed. And I forgot to mention our branch chief of planning, monitoring, and social science, Kathy Westonsko-Davis, back there, by the way. The plan had its, it was successful to the point that we did not get the bird listed. It was, we had a good agreement with Fish and Wildlife Service. We tried to socialize the plan. We thought we did a good job. We did get some pushback on some things in 2015, key RNAs and grazing. We had an opportunity during the administration change in 2019, was the second attempt at an amendment. It was to even further bolster the plan, bring in some other conservation measures, put mitigation, compensatory mitigation to the state, and make it voluntary for the landowners or the permittee holders in the terms of grazing. And also it removed all grazing exclusions from the key RNAs. That was immediately enjoined by the courts, and we have since been remanded to and are currently working under the 2015 RMPs, and that is the reason we're here today. We are going to, since 2015, there's new data that we've been collecting from the field, there's new science, it's a new administration, and we have an opportunity to further embolden that plan to make it defendable, to make it workable and doable, and to make sure we take in all the comments that we are getting. So I think we have a good presentation coming up from Quincy. The preferred alternative is 5. And so we have 6 alternatives in this RMP. The first alternative is the 2015 RMP, the plan we're currently working under. Alternative 2 is the 2019 RMP. And the third alternative is the conservation alternative, which is, we have bookends for every RMP that we do. That is full conservation. So in terms of grazing, alternative 1 is no grazing in the key RNAs. Alternative 2, the 2019 plan, all grazing is allowed, even in those key RNAs that were identified in 2015. Alternative 3 is no grazing. It's our conservation alternative. Alternative 4 allows for some grazing, there's a mixture of, within those 13 key RNAs, a mixture of grazing and no grazing. And then the preferred alternative 5 is even more allowances of grazing within some of these key RNAs. They really dialed it in with site-specific ground truthing. And you'll be able to see these new boundaries on the maps, all compared with alternative 1. You can see the changes after we get done talking here. But I want to bring Quincy up, and let's get in the meat in this sandwich, and then we can maybe take some questions at the end before we get going here, and then we will have all of our specialists at the boards, and questions will be encouraged at that time too. So thank you again for being here. Appreciate your time.
Okay, so hitting briefly on this, just want to reiterate this. The one piece here is the purpose of this meeting. We're in the middle of a comment period, understanding that we have a complex document. We want to make sure that if there's questions on where do I find this, etc., we're able to help point to where that information is so you guys can be able to provide the best comments possible. So this meeting is about helping to understand, answer questions. If you do want to make comments, we're required by law to answer in writing in our record all substantive comments, and so we want to make sure that when we get a comment, it's in a format that we can document in our record as well. So if you do have a comment, there's some comment forms in the back you can write and leave with us tonight, or there's a couple options through the e-planning site where you can provide comments as well. I'm going to hit this really quick because Todd hit it as well. This is just a brief summary of how we got to where we are with the 2010 listing, 2015, as he said. Because of the BLM Forest Service planning efforts in 2015, the service determined that that the bird wasn't warranted for listing. In 2019, we made some additional changes. Again, the nature of changes in 2019 varied state by state. Montana and Dakotas didn't change it at all. And then some states, my home state of Utah, we made a lot more changes. The intent there was really trying to help improve alignment with some of the state plans and information. Because of the court injunction, 2019 was not overturned. It was just we were told that we can't implement it. And so that's why it's one of our alternatives, but it is not what we're currently doing. So why do we do this now? Since 2015, we've had a lot of new information continue to be gathered. We have seen continued declines in the populations across the West, almost completely across the West, a little bit different in Montana. But while there's pockets here and there that are doing different levels of the trends up and down, across the West we are seeing declines. And that's the concerning. Looking at that, that 37% decrease since 2002. We've also hit a lot of the adaptive management triggers, where things that we identified, thresholds that we identified in 2015 of concerning if they were met or exceeded have been met. As we identified there, 16 in relation to habitat areas that have been hitting those habitat triggers, 42 that have hit population triggers. Of course, we had the major drought, multi-year, and having the effects of that on on the habitat, and then that corresponding on the bird populations. The other thing is 2015 has had lawsuits, a lot of lawsuits related to it. 2019 has had a lot of lawsuits related to it. We've learned things implementing these documents over the past 10 years. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we're applying lessons learned from those court cases and lessons learned from implementation as we move forward to create a more durable planning effort. So 77 plans. The intent here is not to reset. So in 2019, we didn't change all the decisions from 2015, especially here in Oregon. It was specific targeted decisions. In this effort, similarly, we're not saying, let's redo everything. If there's things from 2015 and 2019 that are working, we want to keep those going forward. We're building on looking at where is there new science, where is there new information, and where are there lessons learned that we can improve that conservation balance with use and making sure that the bird will be able to persist and that we'll be able to continue to have uses on public lands. This is our planning area for this effort. This is the other difference compared to 2015 and 2019. Those were state-specific planning efforts. guided by an overarching range-wide strategy, but each one had their own. In this effort, we're doing one EIS for the whole area. We will end up with individual state records of decision. One of the things the courts did find problematic was our cumulative effects analysis. That when you add the BLM's management actions across the West with the state's and other agencies' management, how does that work overall in that overarching picture? That's one of the reasons we've chosen to go with a range-wide EIS, is to help be able to demonstrate that a little easier for the courts. So this is our planning area. Obviously everything in there doesn't have sage-grouse habitat. This is the 2015 as maintained. PHMA, GHMA, so priority habitat management areas are the areas that are more, they're higher priority, and they have management that reflects that. And then the lighter purple is the, or pink, or fuchsia, is the general habitat management areas. And then in some states there are some additional categories. This is where you have the blue, depending on the state. It has a different name and a different purpose. Restoration areas in Montana, important areas in Idaho, other in Idaho or in Nevada. Wyoming and Oregon just stuck with the priority in general. Even in here though, all of our decisions aren't applicable, because as a public agency, as the BLM, we only have jurisdiction where we administer those lands and minerals. And so this is what happens if you take this layer, and so the habitat management areas, and clip it to where we have jurisdiction. That's where these plan amendments are considering changes. So in this instance, if there's private land within these areas, our changes don't directly affect what can and can't be done on those non-BLM lands. Obviously there's indirect effects, especially when you're looking at some mineral issues, but our decisions here only apply where we have jurisdiction to apply them. So if we're looking at, the question here is, if we're doing a targeted change, what are we changing? Todd had mentioned Appendix 2 outlines all the decisions from the 2015 plans by state, and then all of which of those changed in 2019. The third column in Appendix 2 identifies which ones we're not planning on changing as part of this effort, meaning they get carried forward. Basic rule is, as you look through this EIS, is if you can't find something in the document, it's probably because we're not changing it in the management. So we're building on those management actions and then focusing on those pieces that we're looking to change. One of the big ones is the HMAs, those habitat management areas. We've had a lot of new science come up since 2015. This is an example of some of the sciences that we are considering in reevaluating those areas. We'll hit this a little bit later. Angel will talk, no, I'll talk about the ODF and W effort. So we've learned a lot over the years. We've had a lot of new information continue to be collected or created, whether it be science or monitoring information. We wanted to make sure that we're considering that new information as we're assessing, are the areas from 2015, which is where in Oregon where we're at, are those in the right place? Are we prioritizing the right places? Did we miss anything that was nothing before, but we should manage it as priority or general now? Did we include something before that we probably shouldn't have based on the new data? We said it was priority, but really there's no habitat there. So, making those kinds of adjustments based on the information. One of the big pieces that we've learned a lot on in the past 10 years is the genetics, and looking at, as we've collected feathers and done the DNA analysis, looking at how are these populations connected to each other across the range. In Oregon, and again, I know this is a little further from you guys, but the Columbia Basin population of greater sage-grouse, we're not including. That's an example of and I think it has been officially recognized, I'm not positive here, as a distinct population segment. I'm looking at my biologist here.
I don't know if it's official or not.
Okay, but the concept there is it has been separated from regular interchange of the genetic material. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we're seeing if there's areas that are setting up similar to that. That one, the bi-state, right along the Nevada-California border, has similar issues to that. We're looking at the genetics saying, are there instances across the range where there might be concerns in relation to that potentially happening going forward? And what can we do as an agency to help stop that? looking at breeding models related to habitat, breeding habitat and lek persistence. What characteristics on the landscape are associated with leks, the breeding areas that persist into the future versus those that have gone historic, extirpated. I hate to use the word extirpated. Basically, leks that are no longer active. Are there characteristics that we can look at on the landscape that we can say, let's try to manage for these areas that do persist? Obviously, there's ODFW and multiple agencies collect data every year on lek attendance. So we know where are the birds currently using, are there areas where we have higher abundance, lower abundance, and how does that change our picture? The impacts to climate change, or impacts from climate change, the big picture on that one that we want to make sure is looking at the models that are out there. We don't want to put protections in areas that, based on the models that we're seeing, aren't going to be habitat for sage-grouse in 30 years. We want to make sure that we're putting management where it makes sense to be able to have that persistence long term. The challenge with those models is there's a lot of things happening in these ecosystems. The models generally are looking at sagebrush persistence, given the various model runs of scenarios of climate change. They don't always look at what's under the sagebrush, the grasses, the forbs. The models aren't teasing that out as well. So we're using the best information we can in relation to, and there are some areas where, based on soils drying out and warming, the models are saying this area is not going to have good sagebrush in X many years. And so we're trying to take that into account in where we're putting our management decisions. And then obviously this last one, all those others are national data sets. We also know that there is local data that is collected, and we want to make sure we're taking that into account. And that varies state by state as far as research projects that are given state wildlife agencies undertaking, etc. So we wanted to bring all that to bear and make adjustments to the PHMA. In addition to that, so this is a list of, so that first one spent some time on the HMAs. In addition to that, we're also adding, in most states, a couple states had this in 2015, Oregon I don't think was one of them, we're adding non-habitat criteria. So the concept here is, some states, you have lumpers and splitters. When you draw your HMA boundaries, some are more specific, some are less specific. When you go out on the ground on a project and you say, oh, we're in PHMA, but this isn't habitat. How can we deal with those situations and include some site-specific flexibilities? So that's something we're considering in our range of alternatives. We're looking at our mitigation approach. And specifically on the mitigation approach, it's more the outcome that we're looking for. Net gain, no net loss. We're not diving to the level of ratios, 5-to-1, use of some habitat quantification tool. We're leaving those tools. There's multiple ways we can achieve a net gain or a no net loss. We're leaving that to the tools that the states have been working on developing over the various years. What we're trying to stay at is coming up with some consistency as you look between 2015 and 2019, as Todd said. Are we requiring mitigation, and to what standard? How we get there is going to be implementation down the road. The disturbance caps, there's a couple things I'll talk about in the preferred alternative in a couple minutes, but looking at, do we have the right areas? Do we have the right numbers? Are we including the right things as disturbance or not? So that's something we're looking at in this effort. Fluid mineral, not a huge issue in Oregon, much bigger in areas like Montana or Wyoming, but we are looking at the overarching objective for fluid minerals for leasing and development. We're looking at, once you have a lease on the ground, what are the waivers, exceptions, or modifications that can be considered, and some of that site-specific flexibilities. Our states, as we were working with our state partners, had raised the renewable energy. Initially, this one wasn't on our radar, but they said, this is a big issue. You need to include this round, because we're getting a lot of requests and looking at a potential conflict in relation to grouse management and renewable energy opportunities. And so that's one that we have included across the range as a question of in the range of alternatives of how should we manage sage-grouse habitat when it comes to renewable energy development, wind, solar, as well as the transmission of that. Livestock grazing, we are, and I'll hit a little bit more detail on this one, we are including it. The biggest thing on this one is, when you look at the 2015 plan, we have 20 some odd decisions related to livestock grazing for use that takes place almost everywhere where we have sage-grouse. And the question was, do we need all 20 of those, 25, 26, 27, depending on the state, or is there a way to simplify it and get to that concept of the threat from improper livestock grazing? That's the problem, not grazing itself. Can we make the management simpler? Horses, that's one of the pieces where we do have new research out of Nevada, where we are looking. There's a study that says it looked at as the population of horses went above appropriate management level, populations of sage-grouse went down. And so that's one of the ones where we were looking at some of that new literature. The problem there is that a lot of our management is already geared towards trying, and the RMP is geared towards trying to get to AML, appropriate management level. So we did look at, in our range of alternatives, are there other things we can do at the RMP level? This is one of the big issues that I didn't hit on earlier, is this concept of RMPs are a framework, kind of like a zoning plan for a county or for a city. It's not the building permit. And so the RMP is the beginning levels of that public land management. There's still additional levels as we go down. There's term permit renewals, there's gather EAs, there's other actions that need to be taken into account. So we are keeping these decisions at that RMP level. Threats from predation is another one of the issues that our state partners have raised, of saying that, you know, as you go throughout the West, there are areas where, depending on the area, depending on the predator, there's some concerns. And so the problem there is that a lot of times the BLM isn't the agency that has the authority to directly implement predation control. But we do want to add in our RMPs some language related to what we as an agency can consider when it comes to managing habitat and considering threats from predation and working with those partners that do have that authority. And then finally, the adaptive management approach. This is one that, as you look in 2015, everybody has an adaptive management approach in 2015. All of them have different thresholds as far as what a trigger is. All of them have different responses. And the problem we've ended up with during the ensuing years is you would have a population that straddles the state line, and it hits a trigger on one side, and on the other side it doesn't. And the question we've asked is, if the intent of adaptive management is to help us identify where there's problems, where what we thought we were going to get out of our management plans isn't happening, we wanted to make sure that we're consistently looking at measures as we're going across that range. Again, if there's reasons to vary state by state, we want to make sure we recognize those. But if there's not, we wanted to make sure that in this effort we were trying to look at a more biologically consistent strategy. For Oregon state-specific circumstance, so each state, in addition to the range-wide circumstances that all the states are addressing, we left the door open because we recognize that there's different circumstances in each state for a variety of reasons, either due to ecology or due to different, you know, what we had in the plans in 2015 that one state may have included and another state didn't. Sometimes we're seeing situations where circumstances on the ground, this is the Nevada example was, they have a locatable minerals mine, so Mining Act of 1872, producing a mineral, but the byproduct, as they were doing that in their tailings pile, they had other minerals that they could market. The difference was those are leasable minerals, not locatable minerals that they had the permit to develop. And PHMA was closed to leasable minerals. And so that's a situation where because of that specific circumstance, Nevada is changing their management to be able to address that kind of a thing, to say, if it's a byproduct of something you're already mining, by all means, give us the flexibility to lease it so that that can be sold and we can get royalties and they can go on the market and it can help us and it can help them and it can help everyone, because it's not having any additional impact. So that's something where you have a specific circumstance in a state that we're trying to address through this effort. I'm going to turn the time over to Angel here for the specific Oregon state-specific circumstances.
So in 2015, we looked at research natural areas that had already been identified. We didn't identify new ones in 2015, but we looked at them and we said, we think these ones might be important for sage-grouse, and we're going to take grazing off of them. We're going to identify a portion and take grazing off of them. In 2019, we opened all of them back up to grazing. In 2024, we're looking at them. So in between then and now, we've been trying to implement. We have been looking at fences as a way of taking those areas that have been allocated as unavailable to grazing and excluding grazing from them. And we've learned that it's very hard to build fences in some of these areas without running up against other issues like we shouldn't have fences within 1.2 miles of a lake. And Fish and Wildlife Service and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife are both in agreement that properly managed grazing is less of a threat than fences close to lakes. So we're taking what we learned from putting up the fences, and we have made some changes here, and all of those, the ones that are changing are mapped here. You're welcome to go look at them. We have some that aren't changing at all. Those are the first, some that will be entirely available to grazing. That's the second, and the other two are ones that are changing the size of the exclusion areas. The other thing that we are doing is not about grazing at all, but it is about material sites. And if we have a material site, and often those are used for roads, etc., that they want to take material out of, and if they can do that without there being a significant impact, and we haven't reached our disturbance cap, we're saying you can go ahead and do that with no further analysis or mitigation. And those are the pieces that Oregon is specifically, those are the Oregon specific portions.
And this is a scenario where in 2015, Oregon used this, and actually some of the RNAs preceded the 2015 effort, if I remember right?
All of the RNAs.
They preceded.
Yeah, we're here before.
It was just identifying those key RNAs. None of the other states included that, and so that's an Oregon-specific issue that we're looking to address here. It's just different than others. This is a quick summary of the HMA adjustments across the West. Again, you've got the restoration in Montana. You've got these other HMAs, the important areas that don't apply to you guys. But what you'll see here is there is, in general, there's an addition of acreage when we're looking at alternative 5 as our preferred. I did not make a change to this one. I thought I did. A clarification. I want to make sure I'm clarifying here. And we're going to hit on ACECs here in a little bit. This says alternatives 5 and 6 for these ACECs. These only apply to alternative 6. The ACECs are not present under 5. So that's a clarification that the table has a hard time displaying. We didn't clarify in the table. But when you're looking at individual changes by state of, where is their addition, where are their changes, this is where you're going to have to go to those state-specific maps. There's circumstances where, like for example, Wyoming is adding additional PHMA in certain areas. In certain areas, Utah is taking PHMA and flipping it to GHMA because they said this population just isn't as important. It's not connected. It's not. So in Oregon, we have a range of alternatives that we developed. We knew, what was it, early 2022, ODF&W recognized and started to update, I think it was our 2011 HMA boundaries, saying there's a lot of data, we want to update those. So those were what we, BLM, used in 2015, and then no change in 2019. As ODF&W started that review process, we had our schedule, they had their schedule, and those two didn't match. And so what we did was we developed, applying similar methodology, a range of alternatives to try to estimate as best as possible what might come out in the ODF&W effort. That's what's in the draft EIS. Subsequently, Department of Fish and Wildlife finalized their map and the Wildlife Board accepted it, or approved it. Commission, not board. The board is in Utah, sorry. And that was, we didn't have that in time to be able to incorporate into the analysis for the draft EIS. In Appendix 3 of the draft EIS, there's a section, it talks about the strategies each state took in identifying their HMAs. And in there we talk about this effort that ODFNW is undertaking and the intent of when they finalize that, we want to be able to incorporate that into the final EIS. So that's right now we're looking at making sure, obviously with NEPA, we can introduce substantive new information between draft and final. We're looking at right now, how do those compare? And making sure that they're, I mean, again, the intent of our draft was that our estimation of the ODFNW approach would get us close to what they would eventually come out with. That will be presented in the final EIS, and we'll discuss the nature of the changes. What we're seeing is in general, alternative 3, which is our most restrictive, where all the HMAs were identified as priority. That captures most of those areas that ODFNW included, so that there's not an additional areas that generally were outside of what we thought. So those are the things we're considering. Now it's how we're considering them across the range of alternatives. And again, here I'm going to hit really high level. Happy to chat after if you guys have specific questions, but in general, 6 alternatives. One, as Todd had mentioned, one is based on 2015. Again, it's not 2015, it's those pieces of 2015 that are applicable to those considerations that we're making here. 2 is our no action alternative. It is based on 2019. 3 is the preservation, and then 4 and 5 are similar in a lot of aspects where they are different. They're trying to find that balance between that conservation and flexibility. 5 provides more opportunities for site-specific considerations when you're looking at exceptions or things of that nature. 6 is the same as 5, except for the presence of those ACECs, and again, I'll hit on the ACECs in a second. Some of the key details in the preferred alternative. And again, happy to answer questions if your interest isn't on here, but some of the key details as we're looking at differences between where we're at now and what the preferred is those HMAs, again, updated using those updated pieces of science. In addition, we have the application of the non-habitat criteria. Nevada and Utah had that in 2019. Most of the other states didn't. And so that will be a new addition in Oregon as we go forward in this preferred alternative. The habitat objectives, we had them in 2015. They were very specific tables with indicators and objectives for what we wanted those indicators to be. What we've done in this effort is kept that table but moved how it's being used. In the preferred alternative, we have, instead of just one specific type of objective at that very fine, at the very site scale, we're looking at qualitative objectives at 3 scales. As you're looking at habitat and how a species uses that habitat, there are different characteristics at different scales that we're wanting to manage for. So this effort looks at a multi-scale qualitative habitat objective. And I can summarize it as simply as, we would like to manage for suitable sage-grouse habitat. That's the same across the range. What suitable habitat looks like differs across the range, differs across the state. Montana is going to look different than Oregon. That's where those specific tables, we've moved to an appendix where we've said, this is what the best available science indicates is suitable for this given area. Whether that's, Utah, we have 3 different tables because we vary elevationally. The birds usually winter low, and then as it goes up, they'll follow the green groceries as everything dries up. Those tables are intended to be able to be updated as new science continues to be developed. The goal there, though, the objective for the RMP is suitable habitat. As we get more information on what suitable habitat looks like, we can update those a little easier. Disturbance cap, Two big changes, not big changes, the changes that we're looking at is not the percentages, generally not what counts as disturbance, but we calculated disturbance at two scales. Project scale and what we called in 2015 the BSU scale, biologically significant units. The problem was that every state defined BSUs differently. Some were based on management units in the wildlife management agencies, some were based on biology, and again, similar problems to what we were talking about with adaptive management. What we've tried to do is come up with a consistent biologically derived unit, scale to apply that to. Again, it's not going to be the same acres, because, so what it is, it's the fine scale level of the habitat assessment framework. What that represents is the seasonal habitats that a given population uses. So the disturbance cap applies to the fine scale boundary to the PHMA inside that fine scale unit. So that is a difference. And then the other is most states did not include exceptions to that disturbance cap in 2015. We're considering exceptions in our preferred alternative. There are specific circumstances that need to be documented to grant that exception, but that opportunity is there to take that local conditions into account when making that decision. Similarly, adaptive management, we're looking at consistent thresholds and consistent scales. We wanted to keep, again, while we're looking at those consistent scales and consistent thresholds of when we hit a trigger, we also recognize that there is different data that different states have. We don't want to limit ourselves to one data set when we evaluate whether a population needs to be adjusted or not. So that's our starting point, is the thresholds identified in the range of alternatives. However, we do leave the door open to either, if a state says, okay, you've said, this tool says no trigger's been hit, but there's a problem. Look at all this data that says there's a problem. So we have that potentiality addressed. On the flip side, if the model comes out and says there's a problem, and the state's like, no, there's not, look at all this data, we have that potentiality. So it gives us a common threshold to start saying, ooh, something seems to be going on here, let's take a harder look. And then the other thing that we don't do in this effort is we don't set specific responses. Now, that's not to say that we don't want to make changes. If there's a problem with the birds, if the bird or habitat are seeing a decline, the problem is we want to make sure we're targeting the change to what the cause of that decline is. So we do have the development of a causal factor analysis. I think you guys have developed some here in Oregon in coordination with the state and the BLM. And then the intent is let's target any changes in management to address those problems. So that's one. Wind and solar and the associated transmission. We are looking in the preferred alternative to make it an avoidance area. That avoidance area has a high bar. It's not, what we tried to avoid, but we couldn't. It's to be able to develop, we're not going to say no from the get-go. That's an exclusion area. But we do want, the plan establishes and says it's an avoidance, and in order to develop, we need to be able to document that there would be no adverse effects to that population. So there's flexibility there. That's a high standard for some of these projects. When you're looking at a several thousand acre renewable energy project, you got to be able to document that it's not going to have those adverse effects. Alternative 5 with the preferred leaves that door open. And then oil and gas, again, not a huge issue in Oregon, but it doesn't close any areas. It's looking to clarify those objectives of when do we lease, and also what site-specific circumstances should be considered during development of the lease. One thing I do want to clarify on the preferred alternative. BLM is legally or regulatorily required to identify a preferred alternative in its planning NEPA documents. We're not required to stay on that one. We're looking for input from the public on the preferred alternative, on the other alternatives, on our impact analysis. As we go into the final EIS, actually I'm going to jump ahead too here, and then I'll come back to that other one. If I don't, remind me to go back one. So the point here is we have one range-wide preferred, but we also know that we have different circumstances across the range. So we're looking for input from the public on the correct, did we have the right range of alternatives? Are there alternatives that we may have missed? Did our impact analysis accurately describe the effects of these alternatives? As we move to the final EIS, we create proposed plans. Those will likely be by state. So those proposed plans can select from the range of alternatives that we're analyzing. It can select from alternative one, for grazing. It can select from 2 for mitigation. It can select from 4 for adaptive management, etc. So it's that concept of mixing and matching. Sometimes folks will use it. There's a section in the draft EIS, I think it's section 2.3 in chapter 2, that talks about the preferred alternative and how we can adapt that going into the final EIS. The intent is to come up with that record of decision, state-specific records of decision, and the one kicker is, and this is where BLM, we can't be arbitrary and capricious. So we can differ by state. We just need to have reasons for why we're differing. And so that's as we move with public input, with working with our partners from a preferred alternative to the proposed plans, we can make variability between states. We just need to have reasons for those and be able to describe those to a judge. The whole point here, this is kind of coming full circle back to the first slide as we're talking, is we need to be nimble, a word I don't normally use with BLM planning. We need to be more nimble in making adjustments, in managing the species. We continue to see habitat loss, we continue to see populations decline. We need to make sure we have plans that can address those circumstances, recognizing those things continue to change. We need to make sure that we can react quickly and decisively with our partners. We want to make sure that we're considering the best science that has come out in the last several years. We think that our preferred alternative is a good first shot at looking at what is the most successful from 2015 and 19, and then what changes might we need to consider. What we're looking for is we want to make sure from the public that our proposed plans are able to be durable, that we're able to balance the conservation with the use, and we're able to make sure that, again, this is the point here, and I haven't used this number all night, and it surprised me, normally I hit on this one. BLM, across the range, we manage about 46% of the surface of sage-grouse, of the remaining sage-grouse habitat. Some states it's higher, some states it's lower. I learned, when you look at the map for Montana, we manage about 20% of that one, just settlement patterns, etc. Much higher in Nevada. The point is, we can't do it alone. The BLM's RMPs are a beginning point for sage-grouse conservation on public lands, and if we don't work with other agencies who manage the species, ODF&W, if we don't work with other agencies or entities, private landowners, who also manage habitat, the bird can't just retreat to public lands for what it needs. We need to be able to work together to be able to hit this. And so that's where we're trying to work with this, is what is needed to be able to get to that durable situation in our plans. We also want to implement our plans and stop making changes every 3 years. So where we're at now is we're about a month into the comment period. We're looking for comments by June 13th. Again, the concept here is this is information that this is the third time we've done this. We're trying to focus it on these specific decisions that we've talked about. We want the input. You can provide those comments in the e-planning site. You can access that either through the hyperlink or that QR code. The intent is we'll take all those comments, we will read all of them, we will reply to all substantive comments, we'll make adjustments to the final EIS, and then we're hoping to get that final EIS with the updated proposed plans by fall. That kicks off a 60-day governor's consistency review and a protest period. Those run at the same time. The protest for 30, the governor's consistency for 60 days. There'll be some additional information on those when we issue the final EIS. If you do want to read more on those, good on you. You're a policy wonk like me. There's some information in 43 CFR 6100 where you can go look at those. I've gotten questions on, well, what is this? Well, it's there. one thing I haven't addressed. In 2015, we had things called sagebrush focal areas. And one of the things was those were, in the 2015 document, those were recommended for withdrawal from mining entry and location under the 1872 mining law. The BLM started a process, so that's a recommendation. The RMP can only recommend withdrawal. A recommendation doesn't do anything. It doesn't deny any ability to go put a claim on, etc. It doesn't provide any protection. It's a recommendation. To implement that, you have to consider the withdrawal itself. In 2015, we also kicked off an effort, a separate EIS, to consider that withdrawal. In 2016, we published a draft EIS, went out for public comment. In the process of looking at those comments, looking at the draft, the agency decided to stop that process and not withdraw those lands. Terminated the EIS. That decision was taken to court, and the BLM was told, you have to finish your NEPA process. You can't just terminate it midway through. So we are looking at, right now, we've been collecting some additional data on some of the critical minerals that the administration has put out, looking at additional information on mineral potential that has come up since 2016 to make sure that we're using the best available information. The plan is to publish another draft EIS specific to that decision. Should the SFA, should all, some, or none of the SFAs from 2015 be withdrawn from locatable mineral entry? So we anticipate publication of that draft EIS later this year. In this EIS, the SFAs are present in Oregon, under 1 and 2. We don't plan on carrying those forward under 3, 4, 5, or 6. So there is this question of, well, what happens if this and what happens if that? And we're hoping to be able to have these decisions moving forward so we can make decisions at a similar time. Similar to how we're working closely with the solar programmatic EIS to make sure that we don't end up at a point where the agency makes 2 different decisions at the same time. Similarly with this SFA mineral withdrawal, we're hoping to have that same concept where we're working closely with each team, and we want to make sure that the decisions that we're coming to are able to be made at a similar time period and are consistent with each other. So, and with that, I will looking for some questions. So first off, again, just a reminder, public comments, we're looking for there. June 13th is the big date. I'll leave that one and say this is a separate issue that isn't applicable in Oregon for the most part. You can access it either through that site there with the e-planning. The QR code takes you to the same site that hyperlink is to. And if you so now the intent is if there's any questions either on the presentation or on the document or on the boards, open to answer some of those questions to help. Again, we're covering 77 plan amendments. We're covering 7, 8, 9, 10 states, I think. 7 state offices. If you're looking for where do I find this or whatnot, open for questions. So if anyone has any questions at this point.
Hi, John Aldrich, Sunstone Mine. I understand on the mineral withdrawals, there's probably some areas that it's going to happen to. But as a miner, we're willing to work. I've been out there since 2005. I guarantee you I know that environment better than any of your people on your staff. I've said since 2015, they're welcome to come out. That invitation hasn't been taken. They can bring one of the trailers out, park there, do a field study for 30 days, because as far as I know, there has never been boots on the ground. I keep hearing the best science is going out there and gathering it physically. Nobody really knows where all the lakes are. Nobody knows where all the birds are actually habitating because they migrate, they move. They don't stay within 1.5 miles of one Lex, because if something happens in that environment, they move. And I know they move from this area clear up on the back of Hart Mountain. They don't just stay in one place. And on the NEPA process, Where is the economical impact report?
Good question there. So for the SFA withdrawal, as that draft EIS comes out, and then again, this is where I want as much information as possible. As far as getting boots on the ground, I'm going to look to the local agency as far as, or to the local office on that one. That's going to be, we want to make sure as we're looking at, does the withdrawal actually provide the conservation benefit? That's where we're looking to folks like you who have that local knowledge.
Actually, out there, we create an environment. Right now, we are protecting rabbits because they use our rock pile to protect themselves from the coyotes. Some of the holes we dig become reservoirs for the local animals, so myself, I don't touch them until they dry out.
As far as the NEPA process, shoot, I got stuck on the other one. What was your question on the NEPA process?
The economical
Social economic, thank you. So there is in this document for the plan amendments, appendix 12, 13? It's a really big old fat one. It's this one right here. So appendix 13 is the socioeconomic baseline report. It has information west-wide. So you'd want to look into it where the applicable Oregon areas are, and it has information on whether it be social aspects, job, at various economic contributions from the public lands that could be affected by the sage-grouse decisions. There's also an appendix, I believe it's 19? No. That's 16. 17 is going to be you guys. It is 18, isn't it? There we go. So appendix 18, sorry, these are appendices. These are appendices I don't have to play with as much. Appendix 18 is, so the 13 is the baseline. 18 has a lot of the tables associated with the different impacts from the alternatives. So those two appendices have a lot of that background and the details. In the document, if you look in chapter 4, it has a summary of those impacts. And then if you really want to dive into some of the nitty-gritty on the in-plan model and how we calculated the effects of the different alternatives, that'll be in those appendices.
And also, how do I get a hard copy of the draft?
Talk to local office.
Okay.
We'll have to print those.
I was going to say, I don't think we have any hard
Because
copies.
No, I said we'll have to print those. So.
I know from the last one, the 5 volumes from USGS, a couple of different drafts that came out. A PDF, you can't quite go through, jump back a few pages, put a sticky note, whatever. And if you're trying to look up something on your cell phone, forget it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm with you on that one. Yeah.
So can I ask kind of an add-on question to John's question? So you might be able to answer this, you might not, because it kind of relates to the mineral withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
But if I remember right, during that process, there was a potential mineral report done, right?
Yep.
How was that potential mineral report going to play into that final decision that BLM makes? Do you have any kind of an idea, gut feeling about how that works on the withdrawal?
So in 2016, that mineral potential report plays into helping us determine what the, I'm using another acronym, reasonably foreseeable development scenarios. So, the anticipated, the issue is, this is the issue with a lot of miners, is you can only mine where the mineral is. And so the mineral potential report from USGS helps identify where are the various locatable minerals located, and then what we have so we've updated the one with USGS. I need to see if it's not on the e-planning site, we can put it there, the updated one. It looks at, is there new information, and then I won't say more importantly, but additionally, the critical minerals list. 18 different critical minerals. That's added. That was not considered in 2016. And so those go into identifying where there is a highest potential for conflict between development and grouse. Then the question becomes, do those areas overlay where the grouse have high use areas? So
I guess that's kind of where I was going is, my gut feeling, it's been a while since I've looked at that potential mineral report, but if I recall, with the amount of basalt we have here, there's pretty low likelihood over a lot of geographic area.
Mhm.
So just was curious how that was going to be.
If I understand, and I don't want to quote numbers, but I mean, of the approximately 10 million acres of the SFAs, the areas that had high mineral potential was a fraction
Right.
of that total 10 million acres from 2016. So,
Okay.
But
Thank you.
unfortunately, the highest mineral content is this part of the country, according to the USGS report.
I was going to say, so Southern Oregon, Nevada.
And that's part of a flexible plan. If they say, okay, this area, I know from satellite, everybody looks at the sage and says, could have been, might be, maybe will be sage-grouse habitat. That's the answer in the draft all the time.
Mhm.
It doesn't say, this is.
And some of those instances, and again with mining, especially with locatable mining, the RMP, we have a limited toolbox.
But what I was trying to get to on flexibility, because of the locatable minerals in this area, I mean, they're finding out there's a nice, good lithium deposit, which, you know, everybody wants to save the environment, they want electric cars, they need the lithium for batteries, they need the lithium for their cell phones. But I understand there may be some issues trying to get into that area, but, you know, that'll hopefully get resolved. But if there's a project like that, I mean, we're small scale. I mean, we're talking like acre and a half of disturbance. And we have to stay within the limit. We reclimate, we move. We reseed, we plant. Speaking of seeding and planting, when they built the new 6155 got rebuilt, they brought in a nice invasive species called Russian thistle. I mentioned to several people that that road needed to be sprayed before it got out of control. Well, now it's all across the desert out there. But on the minerals, if an operation's coming in, and they get with the biologist, and they say, I'm interested, I filed my claim, which I can legally do. Usually, when you put in for your bond to start your notice of operation, you used to sit down in front of a review board, biologist, environmentalist, the regional manager, whoever they wanted to bring in, and they discussed everything. So if it's an issue with sage-grouse, that's when a biologist would come out, look around, do a study and say, well, there's nothing here for 5 miles. This should be okay. But if they start to move in the area, there might be certain months you can't mine. We understand that. But right now, it's like this broad brush, especially the last time, it was just, we're gonna withdraw all that land, no more locatables, and just shut everything down. And economically, this county's gonna have to rely on those minerals.
And that's what we've tried to do with this current effort is to provide for those site-specific considerations. And it's a term that is very broad, but it basically means that when you get on the ground, a lot of our areas are mapped using models. All models are wrong, some are useful. So they are the starting spot. What we've tried to do with this effort is make sure we've built in some opportunities to ground truth and check to make sure, does that management in that location make sense? If it does, it stays. If it doesn't make sense, we've got the ability to be able to document the circumstances locally and make some adjustments, like you said, to where it makes sense to put it and where it doesn't.
Yeah, in 19 they were talking about, we're just going to withdraw it all.
Yeah.
And there were some issues on the map that were kind of comical, the way somebody drew.
So for that one, stay tuned for later this summer. That draft EIS as far as what would be proposed for withdrawal, not proposed, but yeah, it is proposed. Sorry, wonky terms. So that EIS will hit to that withdrawal question a little bit later this summer.
And what's Fish and Wildlife doing on this? Where are they at? I know last time things kind of got put on hold because they said, let's do a management and, you know, monitor the situation, keep an eye and see what happens. Like you said, we're in a drought right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hopefully we're coming out of it. I know I had to put in a $40,000 well last year at my house because the aquifers are dried out. So hopefully we get some moisture, habitats pick up, because I'm sure the sage-grouse are moving, just like the antelope, the deer, the populations. I don't know if you know, Todd, locally, But out where I'm at, the populations are down to about 10–15% of what they were.
Yeah, and that's where we want to work with all the agencies that have that expertise, whether it be Fish and Wildlife, whether it be ODF&W. The local counties have a lot of information that can help us make sure we're, as we're looking at the conservation side, that we're taking into account those socioeconomic impacts, because some of those decisions could have major impacts as well. So.
I know I haven't heard anybody jump up yet, but on the grazing rights, I know a lot of ranchers got concerned because at one time they were talking about being cut back to like 10%.
I said we're not that there is an alternative. So again, alternative 3 looks at making the PHMA unavailable. The other alternatives keep it available. The difference between 1 and 2 and 4, 5, 6 is we're trying to streamline and simplify the grazing management. The objective that we want to get out with livestock grazing is to manage for healthy rangelands. The land health standards include a standard for special set of species. Does the area provide for the special set of species habitat needs? Sage-grouse is one of those special set of species, so if we can manage these areas using those tools that we already have, just informing them with the science, that's what the intent of this effort is trying to simplify and focus on those land health standards are what we really need to be focusing to meet. Because if we do, that should provide the needs for the sage-grouse.
And are they going to finish putting in the fire breaks down all the access roads?
That one that's not a plan issue. That one I'll look to the locals. So.
Well, we have another EA that's going to be coming out here, John, soon, that's going to be looking at fire breaks.
Yeah, because I know it came out in the one EIS, it was kind of the final decision. One of the things they were going to do in management was the fire breaks.
Yeah, so there was those 2 EAs, one was the veg treatment and one was the fire breaks.
Right.
Because
they figured, people coming out there, somebody tossing a cigarette or whatever, going to save the brush.
So
But I know the money that was given to BLM, no offense, Todd, I know you guys just got a road department going and stuff again in the area. Last either August or September was the first time a fire break was put in on the roads on 6155, and it was only about halfway out, and they just ended it.
So those are part of the implementation side that is critical. The plan, those are when it comes to the 2015 and 2019 plan amendments, those are decisions that we've chosen that they're working. Now that doesn't mean that everything's working on the ground, that the plan is giving us the tools it needs. You mentioned the 2 EISs, and they were Great Basin wide, I think.
yes.
That it was vegetation treatments, and do you want to speak to this one, or?
Yeah, I can answer that. There were 2 EISs, and the intent was to address cumulative effects of those types of vegetation management actions across the Great Basin and allow BLM to have the ability to tier local analyses to those broader analyses. We just put out a vegetation management EA that includes several alternatives with fuel breaks.
Well, hopefully it'll do one or two things. It might get some of that Russian thistle killed off because it won't be able to grow.
That document's been out, the public review period's over. We plan to issue probably an updated revised EA with responses to public comments, and Michael's kind of been taking the lead on that, so it'll be coming out
soon
in the near future.
I'm working on some GIS data set.
I don't know if you would like to be added to the mailing list for that.
I'm getting there. I'll get my copy.
Okay.
You or him.
Thank you. And then, yeah, question?
So how would a local permittee know if this is going to change their permit in any way?
Good question. So the permits themselves, the RMP, alternative 3 would have an effect. Beyond that, it would be going through renewal. So the RMP wouldn't automatically change it past that. If you look in the RMP and I forget which section this is, I'm happy to show it to you, but it's in the livestock grazing section. It's focusing on managing livestock grazing in a manner that meets those land health standards. making sure that those land health standards are considering the sage-grouse habitat needs. So using things like the habitat assessment framework to help inform. Whether or not a change is needed, this is the challenge that I have with planning and grazing. Grazing especially is one of those uses that has so many more steps past the RMP to make sure things are working well on the ground. So the RMP says it's available, here's some broad direction, then you still have the, whether it be allotment management plans, which we don't do as much anymore, right? We don't do those as much anymore, but then it's the term permit renewals, and that's where you have specific analysis, you have the terms and conditions. And then, once that's being implemented, you're monitoring it. I mean, the range cons are going out every year, monitoring the conditions of the range, working with the permittee, making sure there's adjustments. All of that happens outside of what the RMP says. So the RMP is saying it's available, we want to manage it to meet land health standards, here's some tools to be able to direct us. All this other stuff happens outside the plan. And so this is where, when there's circumstances, and this is as we talk about impacts from grazing to grouse in the EIS, it's hard to lay down a west-wide set of management. I mean, we have areas in Utah where, given the rain shadow effect, an allotment on one side of the mountains and the allotment on the other side of the mountains could be completely different just because one's picking up all the moisture. And so coming out with a range-wide, we're going to reduce grazing by X%. We may have areas that have no need for an adjustment. And so we've tried to leave those decisions to local decision making where they can look at local conditions that vary both temporally and spatially. We don't want to interfere with that level of decision making because we don't have that level of data in this EIS. We want that to be maintained at this local level. So as far as would they, as you're looking at the preferred alternative in general, if it's available now, I will say except for the key RNAs. So if you want to know if they would be affected by the key RNAs, look at Appendix 17. Does it identify the allotments specifically that overlap those areas that would be available or unavailable?
In some it does. I don't
Okay.
know that it does not.
It should in Lakeview.
There's a table though in Chapter 2. Doesn't that identify?
Those
Yes.
permittees that are affected by the key RNAs already know who they are.
Okay.
You're not going to get any of those questions, they already know.
Okay. So and if they're not in those key RNAs, under the preferred alternative, it's still all the PHMA, GHMA is available for livestock grazing, and it's just a matter of managing to those land health standards. Long answer, sorry.
And we have been following the court decision on the earlier thing, on the 2019, 2015, and implementing measures to exclude grazing, so the permittees will be contacted about that. And we're not proposing any additional areas allocated as under.
In the end, the BLM, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm looking over here, we can't make changes to a permit without notifying the permittee.
Yeah, it's in our
There's
grazing, right?
there's like, you said 2 year?
2 years.
Yeah, that's right.
That's been done already.
Yeah, right.
To
So-
implement the grazing decisions from the 2015 planning direction.
Correct.
That 2-year notice has been issued.
Okay. Yes.
You have adaptive management strategies listed as a key
Yes.
point to
Yep.
this. Is that how will that be used, or can that be used to, when these plans come out, they're put on a shelf, it's a big picture, it's 2024, ODF&W comes up with new maps. We got the new ones, you're gonna try and incorporate those. In 2 years, they have new information, whether it be population data or habitat characteristics. Is there a mechanism through those adaptive management strategies to allow this plan to be updated without fully opening the plan and going through plan amendments?
You almost had me until that last bit. So the adaptive management, basically, there's limitations the BLM has in how we can change decisions. And it's to make sure that both the agency and the public aren't surprised. So there is, the way the plan words it, and I think this is in the 2015, I think it's in the ROD, it's not a specific decision, but there's for Oregon. It talks about making adjustments to HMAs and that we would use the appropriate tool. And that it has parenthetical, maintenance or amendment. So the nature of the change will guide whether or not that should be something that we should do through an amendment of effort or a maintenance action. Maintenance action has substantially less public involvement. As a result, and you look in the regs, the maintenance action, the kinds of changes we can do under that are far more limited. The problem is that with these HMAs, when we start talking about these other allocations, it's available for grazing, it's unavailable, it's no surface occupancy. The concern is if we start making big changes in the HMAs and they carry with them all these other allocations, we want to make sure that when we're making that kind of a change, we're not surprising someone who, going back to the socioeconomic impacts, you know, this area was open, now it's suddenly PHMA, and now it's closed to saleables, it's no surface occupancy for oil and gas and geothermal, and should the public have an opportunity to comment on that. So generally, changing HMA boundaries, and this reason why I'm not saying yes or no is it depends. The adaptive management specifically, and we struggled with this in 2015, it is speaking more to the concept of, well, it's more how do you respond to continued declines, not if things go swimmingly for the next 10 years, what do we pull back from? That would have to be done through an amendment. If things tank or continue in a decline, then it's looking at, okay, what changes might we need to consider? There's different ability for the agency to make those changes. It can either be through a plan amendment, which takes a long time, or it can be exercising discretion. Again, just because the RMP says an area is open to a given use doesn't mean that BLM has to approve every application for use in that area. So, for example, if the 2015 plan says it's avoidance for wind and solar, and we have an area that has hit a hard adaptive management trigger saying there's a significant deviation in the population from what the trends. The way the adaptive management is, it compares local trends with broader trends, looking to differentiate between broader climate effects and more local effects that are less driven by climate, more driven by activity. So if there's a deviation locally, and someone says, hey, I want to come put a project in here, your plan says you can. The local manager can say, we're going to use our discretion and not approve a project in this area right now. Even though the plan says we can, the area's hit a hard trigger. We want to make sure that that population comes back up before we start introducing more disturbances there. That's an example of how the adaptive management approach can inform a local decision without changing the RMP. As far as changing those HMA boundaries, it depends.
What happens on the reverse though? Like if a wildfire comes through and just wipes out all the habitat, and we know it's going to be 30, 40 years before sagebrush comes back. I know where I'm at, since 2005, there was a fire that wiped out a bunch of sagebrush. You can see the burnt out stubs in the field. Sagebrush hasn't come back.
And that's one of the things we took into account when we talk about that new science. One of the layers that we provided to all the state offices, and it's not like they didn't have it already, it was updated burn maps. The problem with updated burn maps is those don't tell the whole story. Not all fires are bad. I hate to say that in relation to sage-grouse and sagebrush because sagebrush doesn't generally respond well. Mountain sage, fires aren't as big an issue. It's a higher precip zone, they come back a little quicker. Your Wyoming, your basin sages, that'll be 50 plus years. The question there, and then especially if you end up with a big cheatgrass invasion after, the question there becomes if it's just a matter of waiting for that seed bank to take hold, for the whether you're going out and doing plantings of seedlings, sagebrush seedlings, you want to make sure that if you're trying to get it back to be sage-grouse habitat, that you're not introducing a whole bunch of disturbances that would then preclude it from being sage-grouse habitat because of anthropogenic disturbance. So in that scenario, there are instances and there are areas in the West that I'm aware of that since 2015, given the severity of certain fires, and that's the other aspect, is both the presence of the nature of the vegetation and how bad of a burn was it? Was it a really quick, light burn, or was it just a scorching burn that really is going to turn those soils hydrophobic? There are areas that we've chosen not to carry forward as PHMA because of some of those changes. So that gets back to the question here is, we can make some of those changes. How you make those, it's going to depend on a lot of the local circumstances as far as whether that would be amendment or maintenance.
So hopefully we're gonna have some future flexibility.
And there is that non-habitat, I mean that is actually one of the aspects. The non-habitat criteria makes a distinction between non-habitat and potential habitat. The difference being non-habitat, we don't think is going to come back. Either ecologically, it doesn't, the wrong soil type, the wrong whatever. Potential habitat could become. So that exception for non-habitat specifically, there's other exceptions for the disturbance cap and for the waivers, exceptions, modifications. But for the non-habitat exception, because essentially it's saying no sage-grouse management, because it's removing everything, there's a lot of documentation we have to confirm because there's a potential for impact. And so we have to confirm that there's not going to be that impact. If you go in there with a fire and it changes the area to where you're saying, between the fire, between subsequent erosion, this area is not coming back, and it switches from potential habitat to non-habitat, we can take that into account in the preferred alternative.
Yeah, because one of the areas I work, like I said, burn out. When I'm working, this is surface layer, little decomposed sand, whatever, but down below is basalt. So at one time there was more moisture, more rich soil or whatever, and the sagebrush got a hold. But those little roots went down in between the cracks of the rock, because where I'm digging, there hasn't been sagebrush there, like I said, for 30 years. I'm finding roots 20 feet down the rock. So new sagebrush is going to play hell trying to reestablish in that area.
Well, that's the kicker, is when it comes down to whether it's with sagebrush, it's easier to protect what we have than to grow new. It just takes a long time to grow sagebrush, and the grouse needs sagebrush. So that's where, when you're looking at the mitigation hierarchy of avoid, minimize, compensate is a great tool, but it can only go so far, because you're trading a loss of habitat today for a hope of habitat in 20 to 30 years. And so that needs to be taken into account when we're looking at those local conditions and trying to consider, should we look at an exception here with compensatory mitigation? That needs to be taken into account, because yeah, you've got documentation there of sagebrush that was present a long time ago, and it's gone now, and it's probably been a while. So this is where the sagebrush ecosystem, I mean, it's an important ecosystem in the West here, and really the grouse ends up being that canary in the coal mine. It's sensitive to certain aspects of the sagebrush ecosystem, and so when it's going down, it's indicating that something is going wrong with that ecosystem. And if we don't catch that now, what's the next species, what's the next land use that could be impacted? So we want to make sure that we're protecting what we have while still being able to continue using our lands.
Quincy, so when a piece of land is determined to be non-habitat, that opens it up for multiple use. That opens it up for other...
For other uses. I hesitate on that one because yeah, sage-grouse conservation is one of the multiple uses. But it basically, and it's not just non-habitat, because there's also that concept of indirect effects. And so in that section, and it's 2.5.2, it's about 4 pages down in that table. But as you're going down into that, the first section is it non-habitat? And once you can say, yep, we've got science, we've got people on the ground, it's no longer just that desktop exercise, it is non-habitat, we've confirmed that. Then the question is, would that given use in that area have indirect effects to adjacent habitat. So that question has to be documented. The concept there is, and towards the end of that section, we have language in it that talks about coordinating with ODF&W, with a local state agency. The concept there is to make sure that just because that's not habitat doesn't mean we're going in and carving it out of PHMA. Because the given use that we're saying could be okay, a different use in that same area may not be okay. The examples I always love to give is a compressor station for a pipeline, very noisy, and could affect out quite a ways given the noise impacts to grouse. A cell tower going to have very little impact, very small footprint. And so just because you go in and say, we are granting this exception to this project under this management action, and then another use comes in and says, we want to do the same thing, you got to go through the same process to document, are you going to have the same effect? Now, if it's the same use, if it's a cell tower and they want to put another one on it, that should be a pretty easy process. But basically what we've done there is to be very cautious, again, because the benefit to the user is no sage-grouse management, no mitigation requirement, no disturbance cap, no allocation. Because that's such a benefit to the user and a potential impact to the grouse, we want to make sure we're documenting it will not impact grouse here nor grouse in the adjacent areas. And so there is a documentation standard, but you don't have to go through a plan amendment. So, to make the change. Yeah?
So your mitigation discussion made me think of something. I'm on the BLM, Southeast Oregon BLM RAC, and we went and saw the new proposed lithium mine. And I learned something about the mining law of
1872.
1872. I'm old, 1772 old too. But anyway, it says mitigation, and from what I gathered from that tour is, if it's a field of crested wheat, they have to replant crested wheat. It's returning, the mining law says they will return to what's existing. But that thing was written in
1872.
And it was probably a lot different habitat. In the 60s and 80s, a lot of that country was mowed down sagebrush and sprayed and converted to crested wheat. And I guess as a RAC member and a retired wildlife biologist, the intent of that law was to return it to natural, native, sage-grouse habitat, if that's what it was. And yet, there's this loophole I'm seeing. Is there anything in this EA or EIS or any other future mining, the mining one, where they're going to look at that and maybe discuss the intent of that and look at better mitigation, maybe I call it better, or native grass and sagebrush instead of just letting them seed crested wheat again?
So there's some language in the in Utah. I know there's some language in the 2015 document that speaks to former seedings and how. Okay, so in Oregon's too. So those decisions are not changing, and in those instances, basically there is an intent. And again, that's a little different because that's saying how you want to manage that seeding area going forward. That's not getting to the reclamation. This is where you can start getting into that difference between reclamation versus restoration.
And mitigation.
And mitigation here, this becomes the issue of if you're looking at the habitat assessment framework and you're looking to say, are we providing a no net loss of habitat or a net gain of habitat, which is I think what the ODF&W's goal is to actually have an improvement. In that scenario, from the plan perspective, it may not require that crested wheatgrass be converted to sagebrush, but as that mine is looking to mitigate potential impacts, it could be looking at saying, how can we improve the condition for sage-grouse in this vicinity? And that can be looked at as part of that ability, is looking at plant either seed mix or seedlings for sagebrush to be able to help encourage recruitment for those sage types. Anything else?
Usually BLM gives us the requirement of the seeds we have to put back in.
I said this plan doesn't do that. So we're setting the standard for, we want to in the end, we want to manage PHMA to provide suitable habitat, if ecologically it's capable of doing that. So if it's capable of doing that, we want to move towards that suitable condition. And that's generally going to include some sagebrush components unless you're in brood rearing habitat. Yeah?
So regarding the key RNAs, there's a growing body of literature and evidence to support what's long been known on the ground, which is that well-managed grazing is not a threat to the species. There's, as I understand it from the presentation earlier, the preferred alternative does include some new exclusion to grazing and some of those key RNAs. And so two questions, I guess. One, I'm wondering what the evidence is, that's been used to support that in the preferred alternative. And two, given an acknowledgement that well-managed grazing is not a threat to the species, I'm curious about the designation of key RNA at all and what the value is there. Recognizing the RNAs existed before.
Yes, this is it.
designating it as key RNA.
And I'm going to look, Angela, do you want to tackle that one?
So, we're not proposing any larger exposures than what was proposed under 2015. So, when you had said new, I just wanted, in case I wasn't clear before.
Okay.
They're trying to balance, with this smaller area being unavailable to grazing, provide research that could be used broader on sage-grouse and other sagebrush-dependent species. So what we've done is we've reduced the exposure size, the areas allocated as unavailable to grazing in many areas.
Under alternative 5.
I'm sorry?
Under alternative 5.
Yes, under alternative 5, which isn't our decision yet, as Quincy said. Some of them will remain entirely unavailable to grazing, and that was an earlier land use plan decision prior to 2015 when they were initially identified.
There was 2 key RNAs, 1 key RNA that had that, okay.
Well, one in Burns as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
One in Lakeview.
One in
Yeah.
Lakeview, one in
One in
Burns, okay.
Lakeview.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, so those 2 would remain unavailable under all the alternatives. That's not let me put it this way, that's not a decision we're revisiting. That would carry
Right.
forward under all of our alternatives.
And it was not made in the 2015 plan. It was made long before that. Yeah.
Now, to the other point, as far as the science, this becomes a question of A, what is the purpose of the unavailable to grazing the key RNAs? Is it to protect grouse, or is it to help inform research? So that's one of the distinctions we need to make sure we're looking at. The other is, in looking at the impact analysis, this gets back to, are we making an informed decision? So this would be where if there's some additional research that's not covered in there, looking at the impacts that we have in there on the effects of grazing to grouse and the effects of closing areas to grazing to grouse, are we capturing the right impacts? Are we describing the potential effects both to grouse and to the larger economy and to socioeconomics to make sure that we're aware of the effects of those changes? There's a new study that's in the process, wanted to be published, the 10-year study out of Idaho State.
I thought it was published.
It
It hasn't been published yet. So there was a newspaper article that said, we're done.
Right.
And we said, yay! The problem,
Under peer review.
it's under peer review. So we are waiting. Now, there was a question, and I believe it was in the virtual public meeting, on if that comes available later, can you roll that in? Well, during this process, absolutely. Later, if we go forward with our current preferred alternative, aside from the key RNAs, more broadly on available for grazing, that gets to your question on how do permittees know what changes would occur. As that other science helps inform whether certain changes to existing grazing practices are needed to meet land help, that's where that comes into that aspect. But as far as the key RNAs, that's more specific for right now.
Do you want to say what that Idaho study is showing?
I'm not sure. The newspaper article. This is the concern is without it having been peer reviewed and published, all we have is whoever wrote the article saying this is what it said.
Okay.
So it was generally supportive of finding that grazing could coexist with grouse, which is something that anecdotally we've known, and several articles in other areas of the range That one has a particular strength because it's a 10-year study, and it's if I remember it, it's an experimental study. It's not just a relational study of, less persistence and presence of different grazing routines, but saying, let's tweak these pieces of the equation and see what it does. So.
I'll speak to that just a little bit. So I don't think it was actually just a newspaper article. There may have been newspaper articles as well. Where I saw it was in a research update from NRCS.
Cool.
It is not peer-reviewed, published yet. But basically what it said is when you graze at a moderate level, which on native range is what BLM does, that does not have a significant impact on sage-grouse nest success.
I would encourage you to, I recognize that, peer-reviewed literature is the standard that's needed for an EIS, but there are reports to funding sources, there are interim reports, there is stuff that, while not peer-reviewed, does give a good idea of what the peer-reviewed paper is going to show.
As I know, Pat Diver, she's doing one of these meetings in Craig, Colorado today. I think she's done because they're an hour ahead of us. But she knows the author, and I'll actually ask her to reach out to them and see if there are some of those. Like you said, 10 years. It wasn't radio silence for 10 years. So yeah, we can reach out and see if there's some of those annual reports.
I appreciate that. And I do want to just reiterate too that there is some question, and I'm sure that this has been part of your analysis, but in deciding about those needed areas for research and for understanding the effects and excluding grazing, we do have, certainly in this district, and I'm sure across the board, a variety of those kind of places already.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I just wonder what the background is to support the necessity for even regardless of the size,
mm-hmm.
new places under the name of meeting those research exclusive exposures.
This is one of those things that as we shift from a range of alternatives to a record of decision, one of the components in the record of decision is called the rationale for the decision. And it's a section that I want to make sure as we are going into it, again, it's the third time we've done sage-grouse planting, why are we doing it differently? We've seen in previous iterations that question of why was the BLM making these changes? I want to make sure that as we're going into our record of decision, both for our range-wide decisions and our state-specific circumstance decisions, that we're clear on here's the decision and here's why we made this decision. That way, there doesn't have to be a searching in the document for the intent that we are saying this is why. So hopefully we'll be able to get that clarity in that record of decision as we conclude this effort with all the input.
Quincy, I don't want to stifle any questions, but I know we're getting along in the hour, and I want to make sure folks have an opportunity to kind of take a look at.
Oh, yeah, thank you,
if they want to.